thank you. I appreciate everyone's time today. My name is Russell McGeorge, and I will be presenting on my dozen years of lessons from doing demand-driven material requirements planning. First off, just address the elephant in the room. You guys are thinking, how's this guy been doing material planning for a dozen years? Did he start when he was 10, 15? No, I am in fact a man in my 40s. Yeah, all jokes aside, I came here by a somewhat circuitous route. I've started with my current employer for 3 years ago now. But I have degrees in math and philosophy. I went on to get a law degree before realizing that maybe the practice of the law was not for me. Then returned to manufacturing, where I'd spent just a little time before law school, and I started to work with Unilever on its floor. I was a line 38 case packer, making Dove body washes and Axe shampoos and Suave and all manner of other things that City Factory made. And after a little more than a year, I had an opportunity to become a material planner for Unilever Jefferson City. And as luck should have it, my material planning portfolio was the first to really be dedicated to demand-driven methodology. So I was planning all of the raw materials, all the non-bulk, I should say, raw materials for Unilever Jefferson City. And in that role, I think it was my second week in role, I was trained on DDMRP and on using the DD Tech product back then called Replenishment Plus. So, enjoyed a couple of years of frankly a great success with Replenishment Plus in that material planning role. Went months, quarters without running out of materials. Seemed like we were always able to support significant change. In time, I got a promotion to a corporate role, leading our demand-driven implementation, kind of as a liaison between corporate demand and supply planning and the factory, which I'll talk more about later. And ultimately, they added some material planning excellence to my role, which is where I ended up moving to Aptiv. So Aptiv, maybe not a household name, but it should be. We make a lot of outstanding car parts. We have 3 different divisions, and we have a significant DDMRP implementation driving material planning, as well as parts distribution between our sites. But we're a T1 automotive supplier that hopefully you'll learn a little bit about as I go on through the presentation. So let's get to it with lesson number 1, and it's a difficult one to absorb. I think the first lesson on material planning is nobody really cares why you ran out of material planning, and this is a lesson I actually learned why as the person who didn't care when I was on the line, right? So I was working on line 38, and we would have to go work and rework because we were out of labels, or they didn't have product made for what we were running that night. And I recall just thinking, this has been on the schedule for weeks. How did they not see this coming? What happened here? And I didn't realize at the time that there can be a lot more to it. But at the same time, I don't know that I would have cared, right? I was there. I had invested my time. I was ready to work. So the question for material planners, the question for planners of any type is really, how do you figure out how to avoid shortages and overstocks, right? By being more proactive. And, I think that quickly, as I got into the material planning role, I started to learn about, what are the habits of being a proactive planner, right? Uh, I think that you want to be checking your alerts and exceptions. That's a big one, right? What are the things that the system is saying need to be replanned, pushed out, canceled, pulled forward? You know, are my vendors replying to me? I flag my emails if I expect a reply, and if I didn't get that reply, I go back and follow up. There's a question for planners of any type is really, how do you figure out how to avoid shortages and overstocks, right? By being more proactive. And, I think that quickly as I got into the material planning role, I started to learn about, what are the habits of being a proactive planner, right? Uh, I think that you want to be checking your alerts and exceptions. That's a big one, right? What are the things that the system is saying need to be replanned, pushed out, canceled, pulled forward? You know, are my vendors replying to me? I flag my emails if I expect a reply, and if I didn't get that reply, I go back and follow up. Um, are we checking our schedule? Are we checking to see the parts are available before we rearrange our schedule, right? There's a lot of things that we can do, including kind of this next lesson. But I really want to emphasize that a big lesson, not just for DDMRP, but for all material planning, is you have to figure out how to be proactive about how you're doing it. That next point, one of the key points I think of proactive planning, I like to boil it down to trust it or adjust it. And when I say trust it or adjust it, what I really mean here is I used to think that I could outwork it, that I could just put in enough hours and the material plan would be fine because I'd invested enough time in it. But ultimately, I think that you can't outrun all your problems by outworking them. And when I say trust or adjust, so what I mean is that I needed to do those things that prevented the problems from reoccurring. I needed to invest the time to make the changes, whether it was adding an MOQ, changing a coverage profile, adding some safety stock, updating the lead time, all the different things that go to material maintenance, right? Change my buffer. It's the big one in DDMRP, right? Like, have I got excess spike qualification on this material? Do I need to change the buffer on this? If I can't say that I trust it to continue to ordering, and I'm not confident that I'm driving out the reason that there was manual intervention, then I need to make some changes, right? So when I say trust or adjust it, this is a lesson that I learned stubbornly over a great deal of time. There's a prop I used to carry around as I went to corporate that I when I was a material planner took notes for a full year on the differences between my MRP recommendations and my DDMRP recommendations, and I vetted them against each other. And I came over time to trust my DDMRP recommendations, but it was a significant amount of time. And frankly, your best planners may require some significant convincing, right? They may try to poke holes in their logic, in the logic of the system. They may find that anecdotal material that was poorly planned and hold it against you for a while. But ultimately, you have to empower those folks to do their due diligence and feel the degree of confidence that they need to feel, and let it vet the system. Let's proactively maintain these materials. And the other, kind of, elevator pitch for it that I like to give is, how do we move from firefighting to fire prevention, right? So many of us, plan our sites from hot lists, and the topic du jour on our daily meetings is the expedite or the material that we're rushing to create a spot buy for. But what are we doing each day? The blocking and tackling of material planning to make sure that those issues don't occur down the line. Encourage you to trust it or adjust it. Lesson number 3, and this is one that certainly took quite a bit of time to figure out, because you like to think that the logic wins out, or that you can dictate to people that they trust the thing because you trusted it. But when I say meet them where they're at, this is one where, you know, traditional MRP and our embedded ways of working can be very difficult to supplant. And that's not necessarily because they're great, but oftentimes legacy ERPs are, they have a certain amount of they're ultimately something that can be very intuitive, right? Traditional material planning can seem just like a ledger. Like, I got a bit of safety stock, but ultimately it's just addition and subtraction, and I just need to maintain that. So if you accept, though, that as you introduce DDMRP in your implementation, and you don't expect everyone to just drink the Kool-Aid of it, how do you get them to engage? How do you meet them where they're at? And you find yourself making concessions and modifications in your implementation that you can always roll back, but that give somebody else some confidence, and help to move the ball towards our larger goal, right? So there's some things that we leave off a buffer that we would like to have buffered, right? Sometimes we use, here's a big one. Some folks want to use forward daily usage rather than historical usage or blended usages for their daily calculations. Some folks want more or less safety than the buffers would otherwise recommend. And, and some folks really just need reminders all the time. They want to understand that, why their materials are being ordered or distributed in the way that they are. And so, I have a snapshot here, and my good friend Kevin is not the first Unilever user to send this to me. I showed up once to the corporate office with a bunch of laminated cheat sheets to just share with everyone at their desk. Hey, if you have questions about DDMRP, absolutely, you can reach out to me. But also, maybe consult this. Hopefully this helps you to understand, how your buffer was calculated, or how your excess stock is maybe being accounted for in our ordering. Some frequently asked questions. So, when I say meet them where they're at, that's really about not trying to force change down anyone's throat, because that is just not the way that change gets instituted in our workplaces. I think an important lesson is to not treat change, projects, implementations as a zero-sum game, right? Let's separate the people from the problems. Let's focus on their interests rather than their positions. I think that's, this I think is from the book Bargaining for Advantage, but it's one of those things where, when people think that it's in your interest and not theirs, they're much less inclined to participate. So try and let them know what's in it for them, and the recognition. This leads us into another. I think this is a great lesson. I like the way that it's put in the book Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. I remember a new plant manager at Jefferson City had the whole leadership team read this book, and it's full of a lot of great tips. But one that always stuck with me is to remove the friction, right? So it talks about steering, change as being this thing that's gradual. So it talks about steering an elephant, and it talks about shaping the path. And part of shaping the path, as you direct your team and as you steer change, to remove friction. So, what that is, very simply, is to make things easier to accept, and great steps that we can do with our DDMRP implementation and using the Intuiflow tools is to automate our reporting, right? So if there's we have a report that we receive weekly that captures, if any of our daily usages are coming across as zero, So we can look at that part and see if, if maybe we want to take it off a buffer, right? You can batch your support, right? So, figure out, um, uh, does everybody need to be receiving this, or can we have like a buffer manager model where just one person's going to be in charge of it rather than, maybe 8 people at the same site, having that capability. And, find instances where you can conform to current ways of working, right? So a great example that in our Aptiv implementation is that we um, uh, do automated order releases. So we use the SNOP module to automatically release orders to our system so that they don't have to be manually converted by our planners, right? How much time could that save you guys if rather than reviewing each individual order in the system, they were released automatically, and then you could manage it, with exceptions afterwards, right? So those are all great apps, kind of examples of how we remove friction. The latter of these, just so it's clear, because I think it's probably an underutilized part of the Intuiflow tools is, it used to be called the advanced planning module. You can see it called that here, but the kind of rebranded SNOP module, it looks ahead at your forecast to let you know kind of what it expects to release, over the next week or month or quarter. And the way that we're able to use that is to say, okay, well, if we want to have a weekly planning cycle rather than make, daily order releases, because maybe you have a weekly planning cycle like we do because you have a weekly forecast release and you receive weekly EDIs. So in those instances, we can use the Intuiflow SNOP module to look a week ahead and convert all of the orders that we would expect to convert over the next week. We convert those all at the same time in advance of our forecast going out, in advance of our diligence going out. And so we're able to, still have like a daily planning day, even though we're, getting refreshed buffer information each day. This is some functionality that I had when we were at Unilever, because breaking that cycle of weekly planning can be very tough for some folks. Next lesson, this one just goes back to core principles of DDMRP, and that is to focus on strategic decoupling, right? So some folks attending today or watching online may not be as deep into these topics as others, but generally, right, DDMRP as kind of a 6-factor analysis for kind of figuring out, where should we hold buffers, right? Where should we have a decoupling point that says, okay, we're no longer going to subject our downstream materials to the bullwhip of demand variation. And so, when you focus on strategic decoupling rather than just saying, okay, we're going to put everything on buffer, I think it adds a patina of legitimacy to what you're doing. It's also just the right thing to do from an ROI perspective. It's to say, do I really need to buffer the part that is coming from next door through the wall, or can that be planned to my material planning or to my production schedule? It can, right? For a through the wall operation, if I've got something that has a much shorter lead time than my than the lead time that I'm performing my production, of course I can get that from down the road according to just a regular MRP signal. I mean, replenishment will work if you shorten the lead time enough, but not everything needs to be buffered. And some things really do need to be buffered that you might sit there and say, well, gosh, I'm going to hold too much inventory. I'll just kind of let it fly. Well, figure out a better solution to that if you can, right? If something has a lot of variability and you're not finding a way to absorb it, then that's just a big albatross hanging out there that you're going to have to cope. some point, right? So, I think that, return to core principles and focusing on strategic decoupling is an important lesson for any implementation. I'll say the way that we did it when I was at Unilever had a very successful project trial at one of its savory factories in Canada, and it was going to utilize DDMRP for a project in the Jefferson City site where I was based. And they were going to be able to do, multiple pack outs, and it was going to be something where we were ultimately going to be very flexible to day-to-day customer demand. We were going to have shorter changeovers. We were going to deploy from 23 dock doors to 5 different DCs and commingle all these parts in advance. And we created this stock deployment module with the folks at DD Tech that was going to be able to do hub and spoke deployment from one of our warehouses. So when we were looking at the coupling points, we didn't need to decouple the cardboard that was just down the street or the bottles that were made in town, but we had to, in order to get that kind of flexibility, we had to have buffers for our production. We had to have buffers for our long lead time raw materials, right? So where do you need to create decoupling points to achieve your goals is really the important question. It's just remarkable the results that the site achieved. We were able to do to go from a 2+ week frozen schedule to day 7. So today's Monday, they would have been scheduling next Monday, today. And we were able, despite, insisting on that degree of flexibility, we were able to achieve, really record customer service across the site's many portfolios. Ultimately, Unilever unwound a lot of this. Unfortunately, that's a story for another day. But the stock deployment functionality, I will say, stuck around quite a bit longer because of how effective it was. So huge fan of that and the way that it was used. Part of the reason that it's used at Aptiv. We have parts that go in our car parts that are distributed from central DCs to our multiple factories, regional factories that use the same. So we have 2 different now hubs which deploy purchase parts to factories, and you can see how really intuitive the interface is. So for a part, it indicates what's available to deploy, what the buffers look like before that deployment, and what they'll look like after that deployment. It's a great way to really take advantage of Intuiflow's tools and do some smart strategic decoupling of your parts. Lesson number 6, and this is a tough one because it's very company and deployment specific, but develop an efficient training model. It does not mean the same thing for every company. It might not even mean the same thing for every site within the same company, right? At one time at Unilever, we thought we were going to get everyone getting a full certification style course, 2-3 days, certified instructor, take a test, and we were going to, deem those folks, capable of planning with DDMRP. That quickly fell away as there was churn in some of the roles, right? So, if a deployment model like that is not, in the offing for your company, what would be, the minimum viable kind of product, right? So you could go down to, do I just need 1 or 2 people who need to know this? Who's going to manage my data? Who's going to make sure that the interfaces work? Who's got the bandwidth to be a resource to their coworkers? You know, who can we prepare, like I provided earlier, FAQs or recorded training for the things that people just need to know, even if they're not using them daily, right? Ultimately, I think in both Aptiv and at Unilever, we found that a handful of people can support a whole organization, if we're doing so smartly, and we're doing so in a way that automates the tasks that can be automated and focuses on the tasks that require intervention and input. Um, I can't tell folks what's right for their organization, but I can tell you that you might be surprised, at the different deployment models that can be successful, because um, while it might be nice to have every single person who touches the system understand how that system is running backwards and forwards, if that's not realistic for time or budgetary reasons, you'd be surprised, how effectively just a small team can support a deployment. Pardon me. So next lesson, and this is I think this is a great one. I don't want to say for any walk of life. I'm not Simon Sinek or any other life coach up here, but track your lead measures, I think, is an important lesson. This is one that I learned from what is that, 4DX, the 4 disciplines of execution. Lead measures versus lag measures, I think, are a really important way for us to track our success. So, I give the simple example below of, if you want to lose weight, right, that's your lag measure, is ultimately what you weigh at the end of the day is the result of, right? So what are the lead measures? Well, that's my diet and exercise. So, measuring the goal, my weight, sure, that's fine. It's important, but ultimately, like, did I hit my macros? Did I work out today? Was my workout zone 2 cardio, right? Like, what are the lead measures that ultimately drive success towards my lag measures? And in material planning, I think there are 4 big kind of subsets of material planning lead measures that I like to track within my organizations. Master data and system hygiene. This goes for not just material planning, but supply demand, right? Garbage in, garbage out. You want to be on top of your master data maintenance and making sure that you're set up to succeed with a good plan. Secondly, order compliance, and this is a big one. MRP, DDMRP, anybody. Okay, so your system's recommending orders. Are we converting for those amounts? I told an anecdote recently that we had a material planner at one time at Unilever, who we didn't understand why we were running out of materials, but we also had a ton of inventory. And as it turned out, what she was doing was not logging onto the system to review recommended orders, but she was instead ordering 2 to 3 times the order recommendations that were in the legacy system. That ain't buffering, right? And if we were tracking our order compliance at that time, we would have seen that she was far exceeding some of the orders that should have been converted, and she was not ordering some of the orders that were recommended. So order compliance is so critical to material planning, but also supply planning, production. Are we doing what the system recommends? If we're not, why not? Right? And it gets back to adjust it. Alert monitoring, obviously we want our system to do most of the planning for us. So are we adjusting to our exceptions and alerts? And on-time ASNs, rather than checking to make sure that everything's delivering on time, really good planning, make sure that orders are released on time, shipments are made on time. Because if it departs on time, you can generally accept that it's going to deliver on time, and you're going to be all right. So those are just some of the lead measures that I like to focus on. But a big one that I think for most audiences where we fall short is tracking order compliance. And I think that's especially important to call out. My eighth and I think final lesson is to partner with DD Tech. And this is my 12 years of varying partnerships with the group. I have been, I've always found it very gratifying to work with the DD Tech team on their tools to help to develop, what my organization's needed. So they have as much expertise as any software provider in the business, if not more, if not significantly more. Eric and his team have been around, in many ways from the very beginning. And a lot of these reports you see here, there's more than 60 hidden below, are reports that have been developed with the team. And there are innumerable more available in Power BI as you use their Power BI tools. But it's not just about reporting, right? They've also helped so much with developing other tools within the system, developing other tools, whether it's the UX, the user experience improved with your recommendations, the different training modules, a lot of which they talked about at the Accelerate conference. So take advantage of the wealth of experience that the DD Tech team has. So, always happy to field questions on these topics. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I've tried to distill 8 lessons here for you and capture them on the screen. So just running down those again. No one cares why you ran out of material. Let's try not to do it. Let's be proactive and make sure it doesn't happen. Try and trust it or adjust it. Or are you addressing your material planning master data? Are you addressing making sure your lanes and things are set up so that things work? Or are you always fighting fires? Get to that fire prevention rather than firefighting mentality. Try and meet folks where they're at and remove friction. These are implementation keys. Can't recommend enough. Focus on strategic decoupling is really core to a good DDMRP implementation, achieving the goals that it sets out to. Develop an efficient training module that's going to depend on your organization, but the team knows a lot of different ways that it can be set up. So ultimately, partner with DD Tech, track your lead measures. I hope that I've shared why all these are important, but always happy to receive questions. So I do look forward to hearing from you guys. I wish everyone continued success going forward. And with that, I will.